very quickly, the Brazilian establishment united with the Brazilian left to decide the threat posed to Brazil is so grave, the threat from the Bolsonaro movement, that normal legal rights and liberties cannot be honored, given the dangers that are faced, including free speech online. It's like we have to burn down the village to save it. We have to destroy democracy to save democracy. Here's an excellent Brazilian journalist, Samuel Poncher, who works for the news site Metropolis, who yesterday reported the following, quote, "When denying ex-Brazil's request for legal measures to be sent to the company's international office, Alexandre de Moraes highlights that employees of the social network in Brazil are subject to, quote, possible criminal liability." Criminal. And in the same order that he issued, he also explicitly threatened these employees of X that they will have to be interrogated by the federal police. And when he's saying you may be subject to possible criminal liability, what he's saying is you will be arrested and imprisoned if X, even in any case, permits the return of somebody we have ordered banned. And now Elon Musk is saying that he has had enough as well. Now we'll see whether Elon Musk follows through in the wake of these threats and begins to reinstate accounts that have been banned, as he alluded to the fact that he would do. We'll see how this plays out, but whatever else is true, bringing attention to how extreme the censorship regime in Brazil has become in a democratic country very quickly and overnight. Again, after this happened, after Elon Musk said these things, the retaliation from this judge was out of control and very illustrative of how he functions. It was completely unsurprising to me that he did it, and yet I think people who aren't familiar with it should take note of how extreme, how quickly this system can become so extreme. Brazil is a democratic country. They had a democratic country until 1964, when the CIA worked with Brazilian generals to overthrow the left liberal center-left government that Brazilians had democratically elected because they weren't taking orders from Washington. And so there was a coup and they drove the president out of the country and they opposed a military dictatorship that ruled for the next 21 years. And Brazil democratized in 1985, had its first presidential election in 1989. And since then, Brazil is more or less a democratic country, obviously imperfect like most are, but it has a constitution that is modeled on Western democracies, including a very robust guarantee of free speech, a prohibition on any form of censorship. And very quickly, in the name of stopping the Bolsonaro movement, the Brazilian establishment united with the Brazilian left to decide and announce the threat posed to Brazil is so grave, the threat from the Bolsonaro movement is so grave that normal legal rights and liberties cannot be honored, given the dangers that are faced. Now, exactly the same thing is being said in the United States to justify the erosion of legal rights as well, which is that the dangers of the Trump movement are so severe to American democracy that we have to escalate the attacks and the erosion of basic legal rights and constitutional liberties, including free speech online. This is always, in every case where the repression, state repression happens, that is always the mentality. And that is the mentality pervading the United States and Europe, the same mentality that is pervading Brazil. Note that the reason Jair Bolsonaro was president of Brazil for 4 years, from 2018 to 2022, is the same reason Donald Trump was president of the United States from 2016 to 2020, namely that they were democratically elected by the people of this country. And if in 2024, in November of this year, Donald Trump returns to the White House, it will be because, as polls are showing, a majority of American voters want him to be president again. And yet somehow the argument is we have to erode basic civil liberties to protect democracy from the possible return to power through democratic means of a president we dislike. And that's exactly what Brazil is doing as well. They're saying there's a threat that our country faces of a coup or an attack on democratic values, and therefore we have to attack democratic values first. It's like we have to burn down the village to save it. We have to destroy democracy to save democracy. Bolsonaro is a political candidate who won with almost 60% of the vote. 60% of the Brazilian people in 2018 voted to make him their president. He didn't seize power in a coup. He was elected democratically. And then in 2022, when he ran for re-election, Lula barely got 51% of the vote, just under 51%, to Bolsonaro's 49%. It was a 1.5 separating the two of them. So at least half the country supports Jair Bolsonaro, and polls actually show a huge loss of faith and trust in the Brazilian court system. And as we said, there are many reasons to care about the emergence of this kind of censorship regime in Brazil, including the fact that it can serve as a laboratory and is serving as a laboratory for Europe and the United States to see how far they can actually go as well, and what works and what doesn't work. This framework of trying to censor online speech on the grounds that it's disinformation is obviously something that the US government has repeatedly done, pressuring and coercing big tech companies to remove people and to remove content, dissent from the government's position, all based on this new concept of disinformation that was invented after 2016 in order to justify or to prettify what is nothing more than rank, vulgar censorship. And the fact that this judge, I'll just give you one example. There's a Brazilian left-wing political party that is a pretty small party, but they are a self-proclaimed communist party. And they're usually pretty heterodox. They're not part of the left-wing Brazilian establishment. They are very vehement supporters of President Lula da Silva, but they have a very principled belief in and defense of free speech. They are vehemently opposed to any kind of censorship, pointing out totally correctly that one of the first things the Brazilian military dictatorship did after it overthrew the democratically elected government in 1964 was begin to censor dissidents to their rule. That's what all fascist governments do. All dictatorships do. That's the hallmark of them. One of them is to prevent free speech and to impose censorship. And so this political party mocked this judge, called him a skinhead in a robe because he is bald. And for that, for criticizing Alexandre de Moraes, this judge banned that party from all platforms. They were banned for months until he deemed them suitable to return. Any criticism of this judge that offends him will result in punishment. No trial, no due process, nothing of any kind, and that's what they've done now to Elon Musk. And that's one of the reasons Elon Musk finally proclaimed his unwillingness to comply any longer with this censorship regime.